Hi, Leslie. Thanks so much for joining us here on the podcast today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, can we just kind of go start at the beginning and maybe get a little bit of your backstory? Maybe tell us where you're from and what you're doing now, maybe what led you to the work that you are doing.
Okay, sure. My name's Leslie Bosch, and I'm a National Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach. I also have my PhD in Family Studies and Human Development. And basically, before I became a coach, like many Americans, I was working long hours in a very demanding job. Unfortunately, I was also mismanaging my stress. I was eating lots of junk food. I wasn't exercising. I was sleeping poorly, and I was tense all the time. So I was often arguing with my husband, and heaven knows I wasn't having any fun. I didn't really realize it at the time, but I was essentially trading my well-being, my health, and my personal relationships for career success.
Yeah, so many of us do, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, what was your career before, and what is it that you're doing now?
Well, as I mentioned, because I was really struggling, I started to have some health issues. I started to have some high blood pressure or blood sugar, and I started to gain some weight. And so basically, I was looking around, really sort of trying to figure out what I could do to help myself. And at that point, I came across a wellness course that was offered through the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine. And in the course, I learned about an integrative approach to health and wellness, which recognizes the interdependence of 7 core areas of health. So essentially during the program, my homework was to clean up my areas in all these core areas, which I did. And so this is sort of how I made the transition. I started to feel so much better that I really decided I wanted to dedicate myself to being a coach. And that's when I became a National Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach.
Is the work you're doing now completely different than what you were doing before your career change?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't have any opportunity to coach people, to support them in, their goals, in achieving their goals, because essentially that's what I do now.
Okay. So I think women love to know what a typical day is like for someone who is, in a sense, an entrepreneur in a variety of areas. I know I love to even go on YouTube sometimes and see a day in the life of a woman who is doing something completely different than I am. Could you just walk us through what a typical day looks like for you?
Well, a lot of times, as you know, when you're in your own business, a lot of time is spent with marketing. So
Yes.
I'm definitely seeing clients, but a lot of time is spent with marketing and figuring out how I'm going to get the message out, how I can find clients, how I can get traffic to my website, so a vast majority of the time is spent with marketing activities.
Okay. So could you tell us about those core components of health? Maybe how you coach women, what are the different areas that women should be looking at in order to have a healthy, balanced lifestyle?
Great. Well, the 7 core areas of health from an integrative approach are basically sleep, nutrition, movement, um, resilience, which is what I really focus on, which is a lot about stress management. And of course, you can use your diet, your exercise, and your sleep regimes to really support you in that. Another core area is relationships. Another core area is spirituality, which in this case really means that sense of purpose, where you really know who you are, where you're coming from, where you're going, sort of what point of your existence is, what gives your life meaning. And then the final area is really environment, because this is so important, especially the quality and the cleanliness. A lot of the integrative approach, it's a lot about trying to remove, it's about clutter. It's about trying to remove pollutants and contaminants from your environment. And then it's also about making sure you're getting enough time in nature, because nature is a great way to reset your nervous system and to get that clearing that you need to get back on track, especially if you're starting to feel overwhelmed and stressed out.
Yeah, I completely agree. I take a walk every day, no matter what. It's just one of the non-negotiables. So I wanted to actually touch upon the spirituality component of a healthy or of a wellness equation, I guess. I think a lot of women in particular look at some of the more obvious areas, even environment might feel a little bit like something they can do, and that's something that they should be doing. But spirituality is an area I think people gloss over because to them it looks like church, right? So, but spirituality is so much more than that. I just know from my own explorations and really even looking at this planner that I write in every day as I'm mapping out my week, it looks at different goals, and it's, personal health and relationships and all of these things. What are my goals? And at the end, there's always this spirituality box. So can you talk a little bit about that, what spirituality actually can mean?
Well, for me, when I think about spirituality, I really think about it in terms of, number one, what are your values? You really need to know what your values are. A lot of spirituality comes down to integrity and a sense that you are actually a stand for the things that you value. And values are basically just those things that you cherish, those things that, again, give your life meaning and purpose and a sense of fulfillment. And if we find that we're out of integrity with our values, that somehow our behaviors don't quite reflect our values, this can be really problematic for people and can really get in the way of, certainly when we talk about stress management can cause a lot of stress. And so it's really important to come back to your values and get a clear sense, and then connect it to your everyday life and ask yourself, how are the little things that I do every day linked to my values? And how do they actually help me live my sort of higher purpose? And we can do this even something as simple as being a healthy person. Like I say that my value is health, and how can I be a healthy person? And then if I'm not really doing all the healthy things, then I can feel that disconnect between that sense of self and that aspiration and my daily activity.
Yeah, we can even look at that like helping you make decisions, right? We have all of these decisions we need to make, and what are we prioritizing? And if you ask yourself, is this meeting my higher purpose, for lack of a better way to describe it, and maybe there are a couple different areas of your purpose, is it serving one of those? And if it's not, then you can let that go and move on to the next thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And from a stress management point of view, you're exactly right. Helping you to make sound decisions is huge, because decision making can be very stressful if you don't really know how to do it. You don't have a good strategy for doing it.
Right. So I think a lot of women have a fear of burnout, right? What is it that you would recommend when someone has a fear of that happening? They maybe have a sense that it's coming down the line, and they're just not listening to that voice.
Yeah, that's a big thing, that even sometimes people can get this sort of as like a midlife crisis. Even what some people experience as burnout can just be a sense that, wow, I've been doing all these things, but I'm just not getting where I thought I would be. I'm not feeling a sense of fulfillment. I'm not feeling a sense of satisfaction. I'm not feeling that my life has meaning and purpose. I'm just feeling lost and disconnected and unhappy. And it's so important to honor that and to stop and to take some time to try and get really clear about what your aspirations were and how you can maybe do some new ways to get there. Because a lot of times our values can change as we grow over time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important to sort of stay abreast of what's happening in our lives. Otherwise, we can find ourselves, some people use that analogy, you're climbing the ladder, but at the end of the day, you find it's against the wrong wall.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like I hear the same just from doing interviews with women from so many different backgrounds. The message is the same, that we often have this sense of just not feeling fulfilled. And then on the other side of that is you can keep going, even though you don't feel like that, like climbing that ladder, right? And I am a perfect example of that. I may not have felt fulfilled, but I kept doing what I was expected to do for years and years. And oftentimes we have these physical manifestations. Have you ever had any experience with that, or talked to any women who have had almost like weird physical ailments that have come about as a result of just pushing yourself in the wrong direction for too long?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think you really are getting at the heart of the matter. I know, like for myself, for instance, I used to get migraines, right? And then I changed what I was all about, and suddenly they disappeared. I never had a migraine again. And I realized that a lot of that was for me the pressure of the building up of a certain sort of voice that simply wasn't being heard or
Yeah.
recognized, certainly not incorporated. And it was basically that tension of trying to hold that back that was essentially kind of, for me, it was about bridling my voice. I think there was a lot of tension in my jaw and squelching, swallowing, choking back the voice.
Yeah. Can you
Yes.
imagine? So did you actually have like a physical feeling of not being able to swallow food at one time?
Well, it was more, I think, for me, a lot of the tension was coming from the sense that that's what I was doing. I was
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
holding so much tension here in an effort to keep my voice out of it. Like my
Mm,
voice didn't matter. So I think you
yeah.
were so touching on that moment where you talked about we're trained, especially as women, to do what to be sort of soldiers for other people's
Yes.
agenda. And if we at all have an agenda of our own and we're not really sort of following that, that's the big split. And eventually it can create a big sort of crack up, if you will,
Yeah.
a place
Yeah.
where it just break down because you just cannot, the gap between what you want and what they want is just getting too big and you can't sustain the tension.
Yep. And for some women, I think it is a breakdown, an actual, mental and emotional breakdown. And for others who keep pushing, it comes out in other ways because eventually you have to listen, right?
Yeah, like a physical breakdown, it can be.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
start to have, yeah, health issues.
Yep. So you mentioned the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine. Why did you choose that? And can you talk about that a little bit for anyone who might be interested in learning about it?
Sure, sure. I think I chose the Andrew Weil Center because I was going to the University of Arizona, so I was really already very familiar with that more holistic approach. And I know that Dr. Weil, for a very long time, has actually been trying to incorporate these sorts of things into the practice of medicine. Most physicians don't really talk to you about your diet, about your exercise, about your well-being. Only just now are we even beginning to have that little mini screening for like depression, so that they're at least somewhere trying to think about how's your emotional well-being, how are you doing. And they certainly don't ask about conflict in your life. I mean, so many of these things, we all know now, basically all of the chronic diseases that get people, so to speak, are all tied to stress and stress management. It's all inflammation.
And that was my next question. I was thinking about all of the autoimmune diseases. There are so many strange autoimmune, and I say strange just because they're all over the place and they're unexplained. And so many people are suffering with autoimmune diseases. And I know I tend to speak to women about this because that's what I see is women with these ailments. And so much of it has to be from stress, right? And can you talk about how inflammation does that?
Well, it's a very, I could, but it's very like sort of, I'm not a biologist. It's a very complicated, what they call a route by which it affects, but it's definitely something that does underpin a lot of our immune responses. And basically, again, they think that they're trying to get a lot around the mind-body connection. So in other words, if we feel threats in our mind, in our emotional, spiritual, intellectual worlds, it creates a similar response in our body as if there is a literal threat or contaminant in the environment.
And it's something that's happening in our modern world now, but it wasn't something that these diseases all just seem so new to me. And do you think a lot of that has to do with because women have entered the workforce and are taking on so much that there is this different level of stress now?
Well, I think that it's not clear what the literature says on that, but I also think that our world has become a lot more polluted. There are many more also contaminants in our food, plastics, all kinds of ways that people are, and they could literally be having allergic reactions to things. But I do think that the stress on women is remarkable and extraordinary and unprecedented in many respects, it seems, right? Because
It
we're
is,
have
yeah.
to take on so many things. Home, they got to take care of themselves, their home, their husbands, their children, their job, their employees, if they are in leadership roles. So there is a lot of demands, and there's very little support for women to actually take care of themselves, because we really are, in many respects, socialized for self-sacrifice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you have a program called the 90-Day Stress Reset. I'm interested in hearing about that. How does that work?
Well, basically, in that, it looks a little like therapy in that we meet once a week for an hour, usually via Zoom. And I usually encourage people, the program is, like you said, 90 days, 12 sessions. And in the program, I teach people 5 science-backed strategies that really can help them keep an eye on their stress levels, employ their strengths and values, get into a flow state and maintain a flow state, engage in ways of thinking that help them with their mental agility and emotional well-being, and also just a sense of how they can be more empowered in their lives.
Okay. So I always ask this question, but what has been the greatest challenge for you in making a career change and just really revamping your whole life to do what you're doing now?
I think that is such a great question. It's really been a monumental undertaking, and it's really been challenging. And with any big transition like this, which a lot of people might be experiencing, there's always like 3 stages. There's the first stage, which is really sort of the letting go or the closing of the previous chapter. And there can be a lot of grief, and you can get mired in a lot of negative emotions around grieving if you don't really know kind of what you're doing and how to navigate the challenge, right? Then there's kind of the middle phase in which, like, you're kind of in this limbo, this terrible place where you don't know what you're doing, and there can be experience a lot of disorientation and a lot of overwhelm, because there's like so many things you could do, and how do you make a decision, and how do you find out,
and why isn't this working? Yeah.
Why is it so difficult, and
Yeah.
it's supposed to be like this? So there's lots of doubt, and like I said, disorientation, uncertainty, ambiguity, and these can also be very difficult things for people to tolerate. We're not really made for this. So, and then the third stage really is the beginning of the next chapter. And this is really when you begin to make decisions, you begin to take action, you begin to get traction, and you really begin to move forward and feel more sense of, okay, here's where I am, and here's what I'm doing to build this next chapter. And when you're in that 3-step thing, it's important to know that you'll be bouncing around between these phases. Unfortunately, It isn't linear. Some days you'll feel more that you're in the beginning. Some days suddenly you're back at the ending. Suddenly you're in the middle, like going, what the, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and these are just, so it's nice just to know that you're in a process of change and transformation, and that you will get where you're going, and trying to find ways basically to create lots of space, again, for self-care, for self-reflection, for self-love and acceptance, as you really kind of go through this both difficult but also exciting part of your life, basically.
Yeah. Well, that was a good answer, and I can completely relate to all of that, especially the bouncing back and forth. Yeah, it's definitely not linear. So on the flip side of that, what has been your greatest joy then in this journey?
Well, for me, the greatest joy, obviously, is really sort of seeing my clients when they really fruish. I mean, I've had so many clients who come in, they're really stuck, they're really not feeling well, they're really in that kind of, like we were talking about breakdown, and they really sort of we go through everything, we look at everything again, they reevaluate, they reconfigure, they replan, and they get going. And then, like, even within that 3 months, 6 months, their lives are completely transformed. And it's so much fun to watch them sort of blossom before your eyes. It's really delightful.
Yep. Well, I only have one last question before I ask you where we can find you online. Okay. Would you recommend any books to someone who's thinking of, or maybe a woman who is experiencing burnout, maybe who is afraid to kind of take a step to maybe change some areas of her life? And it could be really in any of those different areas of wellness, to tap into one of those, just books that you've loved.
Books that I've loved. Oh, that's a great question. A lot of the books that I've loved, I'm a developmental psychologist, so I'm always looking at books on development, because when you situate all of this in a big arch, like of a life cycle, it always helps to feel it, okay, I'm a human being going through a process and
Yeah.
I'm okay, right? So some of those books, like for instance, Robert Keegan has a lot of those books. He's got a beautiful book called In Over Our Heads, The Demands of Modern Living, and basically really helps you to spell out how it is that we really do feel ourselves sort of overextended.
Okay.
And I have enjoyed that book.
Great. So Leslie, can you tell us where we can find you online? Maybe someone wants to connect and get some coaching.
That would be great. You can find me on my website at boschintegrativewellness.com. And you spell Bosch like the appliances, B-O-S-C-H. So that's Bosch Integrative Wellness. And on my website, you can book a free 20-minute consultation, and I can get a better sense of what's going on for you. And then we can talk about how coaching would work well to solve your problem.
Great. Well, thank you so much for this interview, Leslie. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
I really appreciate the chance to get to know you and appear as well. Thanks so much.